The name hangs heavy in the air even now. Adolf Hitler, a figure whose legacy is etched in the annals of history, a name that evokes a shudder, a name synonymous with evil, with terror, with the darkest depths of human cruelty. His actions left an indelible mark on the world, a scar that still resonates today. Born in a quiet Austrian town, he rose to become the Chancellor of Germany, twisting the hopes of a nation into a weapon of destruction. His early years gave little hint of the monstrous path he would take. His ambitions plunged the world into a conflict that consumed millions of lives and left an indelible scar on history. Cities were reduced to rubble and countless families were torn apart. This is the story of his rise, his reign of terror and his ultimate downfall. A tale of power, manipulation, and the catastrophic consequences of unchecked ambition. But it is also a story of the world that allowed such a man to rise, a world grappling with economic turmoil and political instability. The desperation and disillusionment of the masses created fertile ground for his ascent. It is a story of the victims, their voices silenced by the horrors they endured. Innocent lives were lost and entire communities were decimated. And it is a story of courage, of those who fought against the darkness, who dared to resist, and who ultimately triumphed over tyranny. Their bravery and sacrifice paved the way for a new dawn. Born in 1889 in the small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn, a place steeped in history and tradition, Adolf Hitler's early life was unremarkable, filled with the mundane routines of a provincial upbringing. His father, Alois, was a customs official, a stern and distant figure who demanded obedience and respect. His mother, Clara, showered her son with affection, a stark contrast to the harsh discipline of his father, creating a confusing emotional landscape for young Adolf. A mediocre student, young Adolf showed little promise, drifting from one pursuit to another, never quite finding his place in the world. Yet, beneath the surface, a dangerous seed was growing, fueled by his frustrations and insecurities. He developed a deep-seated hatred for the Austro-Hungarian Empire's multiculturalism, longing for a pure German state, free from what he saw as foreign influences. He devoured pamphlets on German nationalism and racial purity, his mind becoming a breeding ground for extremist ideologies, absorbing every word with fervor. These formative years, marked by resentment, a yearning for belonging, and a growing obsession with nationalist ideas, laid the foundation for the monster he would become, setting the stage for the dark chapters of history that would follow. The First World War provided the catalyst for Hitler's transformation. Serving as a dispatch runner in the German army, he experienced the camaraderie of the trenches and the bitterness of defeat. Germany's humiliation at the hands of the Allied powers fueled his resentment, and he found a receptive audience among the disillusioned veterans of a shattered nation. He joined the German Workers' Party, a small and insignificant group, quickly rising through the ranks with his fiery rhetoric and passionate delivery. He spoke of national revival, of restoring Germany to its former glory, his words echoing the unspoken desires of a people desperate for hope. His charisma was undeniable, his ability to tap into the anxieties and frustrations of the masses unparalleled. With terrifying speed, Hitler's grip on Germany tightened. He consolidated his power, eliminating opposition and silencing dissent. The Nazi Party, once a fringe group, became the dominant force in German politics. Propaganda flooded the airwaves, newspapers became mouthpieces for the regime, and the education system was warped to indoctrinate the youth. In 1939, driven by his twisted ideology and insatiable ambition, Hitler unleashed the horrors of World War II upon the world. His armies, fueled by a potent mix of nationalism and fear, stormed across borders, crushing all resistance in their path. The world watched in horror as the nightmare scenario they had hoped to avoid became a terrifying reality. Section 5. The Terror of the Swastika, a continent in chains. Across Europe, the swastika, once a symbol of peace, became a harbinger of terror. Hitler's armies swept through Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, their blitzkrieg tactics leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Millions were displaced, their lives shattered by the relentless advance of the Nazi war machine. Within the conquered territories, the true horror of Hitler's regime unfolded. Jews, deemed enemies of the state, were subjected to unimaginable cruelty. Rounded up and herded into ghettos, their homes and possessions stolen, they faced a bleak and uncertain future. The systematic dehumanization of an entire people had begun, a chilling testament to the depths of human depravity. Section 6, A Twisted Brilliance, The Tactics of Evil. Hitler's success in the early years of the war was due in part to his cunning and ruthlessness. He was a master of propaganda, manipulating the media to spread his message of hate and division. He understood the power of spectacle, staging elaborate rallies that showcased the might of the Nazi regime. His military strategists, men like Heinz Guderian and Erich von Manstein, were pioneers of blitzkrieg warfare, a tactic that relied on speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. Their innovative use of tanks and aircraft allowed the German army to punch through enemy lines with devastating effect. Section 7, Echoes of Screams, The Atrocities Committed. But behind the facade of military might lay a heart of darkness. The Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews, stands as the most horrifying testament to the evil of Hitler's regime. Men, women, and children were murdered in gas chambers, shot in killing fields, or worked to death in concentration camps. The horrors of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor became symbols of the Nazis' barbarity, stark reminders of the consequences of unchecked hatred and intolerance. The echoes of their suffering continue to haunt us, a chilling reminder of the fragility of civilization and the depths of human depravity. Section 8. The walls close in. The tide begins to turn. As the war dragged on, the tide began to turn against Hitler. His armies, stretched thin across a vast front, faced increasingly determined resistance from the Allied forces. The Battle of Stalingrad, a brutal and costly siege, marked a turning point in the war, shattering the myth of German invincibility. The Allied invasion of Normandy in 1944, a daring amphibious assault on the beaches of France, further weakened Hitler's grip on Europe. As Allied forces advanced from the west and Soviet troops pushed from the east, the net began to close in on the Nazi regime. Section 9, The Bunker and the Ruins, the Final Days. By 1945, the writing was on the wall. Berlin, once the proud capital of the Third Reich, lay in ruins, pounded into submission by Allied bombs. Hitler, holed up in his underground bunker, his mind unraveling, refused to accept defeat, issuing delusional orders to armies that no longer existed. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet troops closing in, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker, taking with him his wife of one day, Eva Braun. Their bodies were doused in gasoline and set ablaze, a final act of defiance in the face of inevitable defeat. Section 10. The world after Hitler's scars that remain. The world emerged from the shadow of World War II, forever changed. The war had left an indelible mark on the global landscape, altering the course of history in profound ways. Millions lay dead, entire cities reduced to rubble. The sheer scale of destruction was unprecedented, leaving a legacy of loss and grief that would be felt for generations. The scars of conflict ran deep, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of hatred and intolerance. Survivors carried the physical and emotional wounds of war, their lives forever altered by the horrors they had witnessed. In the aftermath of the war, the international community came together to create the United Nations, an organization dedicated to preventing future conflicts and promoting peace and cooperation between nations. This new institution aimed to foster dialogue and understanding among countries, hoping to build a more stable world. The Nuremberg Trials, held between 1945 and 1949, brought Nazi war criminals to justice, exposing the horrors of the Holocaust to the world and establishing the principle that individuals could be held accountable for crimes against humanity. These trials set a precedent for international law and human rights. The world had learned a terrible lesson, but from the ashes of destruction arose a new hope for a more peaceful and just future. The efforts to rebuild were not just physical, but also symbolic of a collective desire to move forward and create a better world for future generations. Section 11, lest we forget, remembering for the future. The legacy of Adolf Hitler is a complex and troubling one. He was a monster, responsible for unimaginable suffering and death. Yet his rise to power serves as a stark warning about the dangers of unchecked nationalism, propaganda, and the seductive appeal of extremist ideologies. It is our duty to remember the victims, to learn from the mistakes of the past, and to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated. We must remain vigilant against all forms of intolerance and discrimination, and strive to create a world where the horrors of the Holocaust are never forgotten and where such evil can never again take root.